This show is all about interviewing interesting people and learning. Getting married to your soulmate, it sounds awesome, right? You have an engagement, you have an incredible wedding, maybe you have some kids, and then till death do you part. However, the data doesn't lie. 50% of marriages will end in divorce, and a lot of people will get divorced multiple times. Dennis Vetrano Jr. is a divorce attorney based in New York, and he has handled a number of divorces throughout his career, some pretty high-profile ones too. And he has a huge following on social media. He has great advice for people who are going through a divorce, who are going to go through a divorce. But he also has great advice for people who will never go through a divorce, who are also just happily married. And that's why I wanted to have him on this show, because I think he has great knowledge that he can share with you. And Dennis is joining me now. Dennis, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So just first off, why did you want to become a divorce attorney? Because I think that obviously it's a specialized field, but it can be pretty, I don't know, there's a lot of conflict in divorce, right? And it takes a special person to handle that conflict.
It does, and it's funny because most of the coursework that I took in law school really was geared around personal injury, tort law, those sorts of things. So I was convinced when I was in law school that ultimately I was going to be a personal injury lawyer. And lo and behold, after I had graduated and I spent a period of time, doing general practice, a number of different areas of law, I found that I gravitated towards family law, and in large part because that's the area of law that puts you in the courtroom most frequently. And then, after a few years of clients coming back and wanting me to represent them, I guess because they saw that I had a passion for the area of law, I just realized, you know what, it's not just about being in the courtroom, it's because I care about people. I really do care about families, and I really feel like in that area of law, it's a way that I could really help people the most.
When someone meets you at a cocktail party and they don't know anything about you, they don't know that you are a divorce attorney, but then they find that information out, what is something that they want to talk about with you? What is the topic that they want to discuss with you? I mean, I'm assuming it's divorce, but is there one question that they have to bring up with you?
Well, after I get over the fact of sheepishly telling them that I'm a divorce lawyer, because divorce lawyers tend to not be the most favorite people generally at cocktail parties and otherwise. But I think what people focus on is they always see the divorces as those forgive the expression, that old movie like The War of the Roses. They want to hear what's the craziest story or things that you've seen in your career. And certainly I have a host of them.
Yeah. Did you have a divorce in your family growing up? Were your parents, did they have a bad one? Did you see something in your life that made you want to help someone in your career?
It's funny because when it comes to the marriage realm, my family, for the most part, is comprised of intact families. There are very few divorces and split families in not only my immediate family. My parents are still married. They've been married for going on 50 years. Yeah. But my extended family even as well, very few split families. But I think, when I was growing up, I gravitated towards law and wanted to become a lawyer in large part because I felt like I just wanted to fight for people to make sure that whatever it was that they were entitled to, they would get, whatever fairness was. Yeah.
This does keep you in business, divorce, and you're very successful at it. It makes you a lot of money. But do you think that it should be harder to get married than it is to get divorced? Because you can go to a chapel in Las Vegas and just get married, and it's very easy. You pay $25, $50 and you're married, but then the process to get divorced is just such a hassle.
Yeah, I don't know that we should necessarily make it harder to get married, but I think that what we should try to do is try to educate people more about, how to develop a long-lasting marriage. What does it take? And I think it starts with choosing well. I think the problem is we don't have enough people in my particular space, my particular profession, sharing what they've seen, sharing what leads to the fracture of a marital relationship. And I think in large part, that's why I've gravitated towards, mainly what I'm doing these days, which is trying to give people advice as to how to preserve the marital relationship. Look, I think a successful marriage begins with choosing well. And then I think it's also in large part understanding that it's work and it's a commitment and it's not going to be easy every day. But I think if you work at it, you can have a long lasting marriage.
Yeah, I think Warren Buffett and quite a lot of other people who are successful and who have had great marriages have said that, the most important decision that you will make is the person that you marry. And that will put you on, the path of really success, and it will determine where you're going, what kind of career you're going to have. And especially if you're a woman, do you marry a guy who is going to support that career path? I mean, it's so important who you choose to marry.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was watching a TikTok video just the other day. They have those TikTok videos where they interview like the guys or gals that are driving around a really expensive car. Like, hey, what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
And this guy was driving around like $1 million, multi-million-dollar Bugatti. And they asked him the question like, what's the most important advice you can give? And one of the first things he said was choose the right life partner. And he talked about how he had grown his businesses together with his wife and how they're both committed to being at the office and building wealth, and they want the same things out of life. And that I found fascinating, that was one of the most important things, one of the most important pieces of advice he could share for young people who want to become successful is choose that life partner well.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, because if you have someone who is so driven and they want to build businesses, and you have someone who is more needy and is saying, hey, I can't have you working 80-hour work weeks, that's not gonna be a successful marriage. It's just not. Have you ever had a client call you or come in for a consult and say, I want a divorce, I want this to end, but then they call you and say, you know what, actually, I want to work it out. And then long term, they do work it out and they're still married to this day.
We've had that happen. That tends to not be the case on average because typically, I find that with divorces, typically when people, I think especially women in my experience, when they reach that point that they know they want to get a divorce, and I think for most women in my experience, it takes them a long time to get there. They're very thoughtful about that decision because it is a huge decision to make. But when they get to that point, even if their spouse is able to convince them to maybe try to work out the relationship, many times they ultimately end up coming back later on and getting divorced. But again, we do have those cases where, people come in and midstream of the process, they decide they want to reconcile. But I think, look, getting married, you really need to be thoughtful about it. You need to choose well. You need to put the time in. And then similarly, deciding that you want to get divorced, that is a huge decision to make.
Yeah.
So when people come into my office, I really want to make sure that they're thoughtful about that decision. Okay? I want to make sure they're absolutely certain that this is something that they want. Because my job as a divorce lawyer is not just to try to get everyone that comes through my door divorced. My job as a divorce lawyer, at least as I see it, is to try to help people turn a page in their life, a decision where they know they need to make that determination to get to a happy point in their life or to reach their next chapter.
Yeah. You have said that more women file for divorce than men. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's funny because I think there's a number of different reasons for that. I think more women file for divorce because I think we as men, unfortunately, in my experience, are comfortable allowing things to just plod along. I also think it's women realizing these days that they really want happiness out of life and they deserve more. They're demanding more, and they should. So I think they tend to file more frequently. And I also think, with men, these determinations, like they're not only are they going to not want to take the proverbial bull by the horns in terms of filing for the divorce. But I think with guys, we're not as introspective, I think, on average, as women are. I think they're going to evaluate their feelings. I think they're going to reach out for counseling more frequently than guys do. And I think for guys, in my experience, we internalize a lot of things, but we don't really take the time to assess, like, hey, am I happy? Where am I at in my life? Do I want to move forward? So again, I think part of it is, women really taking action and understanding that if they need to get to the next page in their life to be happy, they're going to do it. But I also think it's guys in general just ignoring not just the signs in their relationship and the signs from their partner of a failing relationship, but also ignoring their own feelings and discounting their own happiness and not wanting to address it.
Yeah. It's never about not having sex when people end up in your office. That's like an issue, but it's about all of the other things that have led to that point. Is that correct?
I think what you're going to find, well, that's a complicated question, to be honest, because I think, I think for a lot of the guys it's funny because women will say, for example, we haven't been intimate in X as an indicator that there's a failed relationship.
Yeah.
And guys will also say, well, we're not having sex, but they're not doing anything about it.
Right.
And they're not in tune with their partner on what they need to really feel that way.
Right.
So I think, sex, I think, is a factor. And I think more and more frequently lately, we are seeing guys coming in and saying, like, hey, that's a factor in my life and it's a reason why I'm here.
Got it. Is it like, though, so that is a factor, but then maybe, I don't know, the woman is doing all this and she's working hard and she's making all this money and she's taking care of the kids and she's going, and the guy's like, well, hey, I want to have sex. And then the lady's, the wife is like, are you kidding me?
Yep.
And then you're going like, okay, well, okay. Or, maybe, the guy is doing something or you know what I'm saying? Like there are other issues that are building and building and building. And so the intimacy is not there because of all those other little issues. Does that make sense?
Well, let's put it this way. I think what I'm seeing
not that
as
you're
one
a
of the
sex
leading
therapist, and not that
causes
you're a
for
sex
divorces
therapist is what I'm
these
saying.
days is women just feeling like they don't have a true partner in their relationship.
Got it.
So they don't have a partner that listens. They don't have a partner who's engaged with their emotions or their feelings or the relationship. They don't have a partner who's putting in their equal share of the time in the household, helping to take care of the kids, helping to grocery shop, helping to do laundry. And I think for women, when you're not engaged with them in the relationship as an equal partner on that level, you're not seeing the interest in physical intimacy. And then the guy on the other side saying, well, we're not having sex. But the reality is, I think women, in large part, what I'm seeing these days is they're tending more and more frequently to be the CEO, the primary wage earner, the leaders in business, the making the bulk of the money, the paying the bulk of the bills. And unfortunately, for a lot of men, there hasn't been a shift in the household duties for them to put in their fair share. So I think when they're not doing that, I have a piece that I put out to basically direct it to guys like, how can you expect your wife to want to be intimate with you when she feels like she has to carry the entire load of everything at home? Because that's not attractive. I mean, I think what's attractive is having a true partner who's really engaged in the relationship in every way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, and I know those videos have done extremely well, for you. Yeah, yes, they have. How long does a divorce typically drag on for? And I'm sure that the average can be very different for, depending on what's going on for a different situation. But
it's interesting. The divorces can really run the gamut. I mean, the fastest divorce we've ever completed was 60 days start to finish.
Wow.
And I mean, that's from the day we were hired until the day we had a judgment of divorce in hand. But here's the thing with that. That's a case where you had two parties who pretty much had all of the general parameters of their divorce agreement resolved on their own. And they basically said, hey, we know what we're going to do. We've got all this sorted out. We just need you to draft it for us and get it done. And when you do that, and when you're reasonable with each other at the outset, and you narrow the issues that the divorce lawyers or mediators, et cetera, have to kind of assist you to sort out, cases can be very quick. But I've had those cases, and I say have had those cases, but I've seen those cases that have been, 2, 3, 4, 5 years longer.
Wow.
I mean, you can have a case where, for example, you're not in agreement, you're arguing back and forth, there's litigation, there's motions filed, and then, there's a change in the judge, or one of the lawyers passes away, or there's a change in jurisdiction in some way, shape, or form. So again, these cases can be long and drawn out. I think it's really up to you as to how long they're going to take.
You've seen technology change, in your experience, multiple decades in practicing and doing what you do. And now there are text messages, there's social media, and that can be used, especially in a bitter divorce, correct?
Indeed. I mean, I think, I always call social media treasure trove of things you can use in the context of your divorce or your family law case. And one of the pieces I did just recently is be cautious about what videos or pictures you're going to put up online, during the pendency of your divorce or your custody and visitation case, because sometimes people don't even really know what the laws are. So, for example, you're in the midst of a custody and visitation battle, let's say in court, and you put your kid on a bike without a helmet and you're taking a video of it. I mean, seemingly innocent enough, right?
Yeah, right.
But their lawyer can just pull that and say, hey, you had your kid riding around with no helmet on, or on a motorcycle that was above their age group, or again, so lawyers can use anything you post on social media against you. So you have to be very cautious. I tell my clients to narrow the people who can see their social media and really be extremely vanilla about what you're putting online if you're in the midst of a divorce or a custody battle.
Yeah. And you've also said too that social media can kind of be telling that someone might be going through a divorce eventually in the future. Not right now, but there will be signs, and you'll see those signs on social media. Maybe someone wants a little attention.
As a divorce lawyer, as you can imagine, I just can't help myself but to look in from the outside in these relationships and say to myself, I even chat with my wife sometimes and say, it looks like this relationship is kind of in trouble. So, my indicators are like, look, if you see on social media or online, there were, say, for example, your cover picture on Facebook is you and your husband and your kids or something like that. Then all of a sudden it's just you. Then all of a sudden it's you on a vacation with your guy friends or your girlfriends. And then it's, there's fewer and fewer pictures of you with your spouse or you with your kids. So I think there's so much to glean from social media. And I think in many ways it's become, for the average person, almost a chronicle of what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
So if you're traveling, you're seeing traveling pictures. If you're particularly concerned about the election, you may see some political posts. You may see like, here's my opinion on this. Or if you're concerned about world issues, you may see that. So again, I think social media is a pretty good insight as to what's going on in people's life at any given time.
Yeah. I'm sure you've had clients come in where, especially if infidelity is involved, and they said, I want to destroy my ex. I want you to take him to the cleaners. I want you to get everything you can out of him. And I get it, but especially if kids are involved, probably, long term, maybe not the best thing, but that happens, right?
It does, and I can remember clear as day, I had a case many years ago, and we're sitting at the settlement table with the person on the other side. And, you have your client reach over and ask his wife, hey, I heard you were sick. And then have your client say, well, I wish you died. I mean, this is the sort of stuff, this is the level of disdain parties have for each other in the context of these divorce cases when it's extremely acrimonious. So I think I try to talk people off that proverbial ledge, forgive the expression. I feel like my job is I don't counsel people, I'm not a counselor, but my job is to help point clients in the right direction to get their emotions under control before they dive into the divorce process. Because I think this is such a perfect storm, forgive the expression, of the mental and emotional, all the remnants of the broken relationship, coupled with trying to figure out every aspect of your life and how you split all of these things that you've become partners with over the past decade or 20 or 30 years. So I think, my job is to try to get clients what's fair, not to try to gouge the other side, because I think at the end of the day, you lose when you do that. I think, there's different ways to look at handling cases. I think there's long game, short game. The short game is like worrying about what you can get out of people right out of the gate. But my job is to help clients see what's down the road for them 5 and 10 years from now. Do you want to be in that situation where you gouge the other side so hard, and not even considering the amount of time and aggravation and money you spend to get there, but you do all of that to get an extra 10 grand, an extra 20 grand, and then you're in a situation where you can't stand each other and you can't even sit next to each other at your kid's graduation. And I think you can't really even put a price tag on that.
Yeah. And I said it earlier at the very, very beginning, but many people who even go through a horrible divorce, they end up getting married again. And sometimes they go through a bad divorce again.
Yeah, they do, and it's funny because the successive marriages, as you may or may not know, they're more and more likely to fail. So first marriages is like 50%, second marriages is like 60 something, and then third marriages is like 70 something percent that it's going to fail. So why does that happen? I think that happens because all of the mistakes that we should have learned from our first divorce and our first relationship, we haven't taken the time to unpack and really work on ourselves. I think if people did that more frequently and they really focused on themselves, being introspective, figuring out like themselves and who they are and what they need or want out of life, I think their second relationship or successive relationships would be more successful. But I think, again, I'm not necessarily opposed to people getting remarried, but what I am opposed to is people looking to get remarried to fill a void rather than knowing that it's the person that they really want to commit their life to moving forward.
Yeah. I said that you have fabulous advice for people who are married or about to even walk down the aisle as well. And I'm sure so many people ask you this just about prenups in general. Do you recommend a prenup even if someone doesn't have a lot of wealth right now? And even if their family doesn't have a lot of wealth? I mean, I think this would be an extreme example, but like a Mark Zuckerberg or even a Jeff Bezos, where, you get married and you don't really have anything, but you're this brilliant person. And then all of a sudden, you're a multimillionaire down the road and you go through a divorce and, your spouse gets half. But do you recommend a prenup even if you haven't built that wealth in your 20s and you get married?
I do, and I'll tell you, I'm doing more and more prenups these days for young professionals than I ever have. And I think what happens what you have to remember at its core for the prenup is really, it's a way of having transparency with each other right out of the gate. You each know what you can expect from each other moving forward. That's the point of the prenup, and that's in part why I'm so pro prenup. I mean, I think so. So when people come in for a prenup to our office, one of the first handful of things we're going to ask is like, hey, what are your assets? What are your liabilities? Like, what's your earning capacity? What are the things you anticipate you'll be owning moving forward or building moving forward in terms of corporations, et cetera. So again, I think it's important that you exchange that information with each other at the outset. I think relationships. We look at relationships like they're that fairy tale, right?
Yeah.
It's love at first sight. He was a prince. She was my princess. I knew from the moment I laid eyes on her or him that we were going to get married. I mean, okay, that's great. That's really romantic. I love the story of the fairy tale. But the reality is, in today's day and age, know what people's finances are, know what you can expect from each other. insist on transparency, and be absolutely certain that this is the person you want to commit your life to moving forward, because that's in part what will lead to a more successful, long-lasting marriage.
Yeah, yeah, and the person you marry is very different than the person you divorce, is what I've read.
Indeed.
Yeah. So let's say that, you do get married and everything's great. But you've also said that you do recommend that couples, and especially if you have kids, that you do take that time to just connect as a couple. And yes, do things as a family and with your kids, but you also need to take time. And I mean, you could be a therapist probably, even though you don't have the technical credential, the education maybe to do it. But you've seen it all. And for couples to connect as a couple, it's still important to do that.
It is. And, I think it's important for people to understand with me, I'm in a very interesting space right now, right? Because I have 2 kids of my own. I have a successful marriage, but not a perfect marriage. Nobody does. We've been married for a long time. We're very much in love with each other and committed to the relationship. But I think in that space, not only can I share what I've seen from fractured relationships, but what I can also share is what I'm seeing from my own relationship that I see looking in from the outside, and vice versa. And a lot of times what I'll tell people in terms of spending time with each other, and I do think you raise a good point, I think it is very important that you make time for each other. And I think, the first step is to say, well, we need to spend more time with each other. And then you start, what's the next logical step that's getting a lot of, publicity? Like, oh, we're going to do a date night. We're going to do this. Well, what about if you don't have time for a date night? What about if you don't have the money for a date night?
Yeah.
What do you have left? And what I tell people is we tend to overlook, because marriages fail with a series of little things. They don't fail with one like major event and it's over. It's a series of little things stacked up on each other over time. So I think similarly with time with your spouse, look for those little windows. Look for those little moments. Look for 15 minutes over coffee in the morning. Look for 5 minutes before you go to bed at night. A little conversation, a little interaction. Ask about their day and really care. Little things. Does it mean you're going to have the time or the money for vacations once a month or a date night once a week? Maybe not. But what you likely have is time for a few minutes at certain time frames each day to connect with each other. And it can be very simple and a very small amount of dedication of time.
Yeah, no, it is so important. I, followed you on social media, saw some of the videos. I knew that I wanted to have you on this program. When did you start branching out on social media? When did you feel like this was a good place to be to share some of your content? And what was maybe the first video that really got some traction?
Ooh, well, let's say this. When I started expanding my law firm, I decided that the way I could really expand it best was to let people know, because look, you can be the greatest lawyer in the world, but if nobody knows you exist, you're not going to get any clients. Doesn't matter how good you are.
Yeah.
So at that point I said, hey, I have to start marketing. This was going back to around 2013. So long time ago now. And just started marketing. And then I started writing my own radio ads. And then I started, again, doing consults along the way, taking trainings, handling cases. And then it got to a point where I started doing videos on TikTok and on Instagram and on Facebook. And what I found through that process is it was the thing that I loved doing the most. I loved giving people free insights as to what I see as a divorce lawyer. Because you know what? A perfect example is I had a client that I worked with years ago. And, and many times you have clients in a difficult process, you're going to see the best and the worst of them. They're going to call and they're going to be, upset one day and screaming at you. And the next day they're going to be crying. And then the next day they're going to be hugging you. And I just thought to myself, this is such a difficult place to be. How can I try to help people? Because people don't want to end up divorced. They don't want to lose their family. They don't want to lose time with their kids. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So how do I try to help people from seeing what I see fails, work backwards and tell them what they can do to make it work better? And I found doing these videos, offering free insights to people, not just about the divorce process and parenting, but also about how to have a stronger relationship. It was the most fulfilling, satisfying thing, and most fun thing that I do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Has there been a negative, and I do ask people this as well, has there been any negative to this kind of side of your life and business?
it depends how you look at it. I mean, I've had people curse me out. I think especially, so you heard the earlier piece, right? And it seems like, at times I'm being tough on guys. So why am I being tough on guys? I'm being tough on guys at times because I'm a guy. And I know the things that I don't do the best that I could be better at. And I know the things that their wives or ladies have told me if they had been better at, they wouldn't be getting divorced, right? So I think when I come at them a little bit, and when I say come at them, I mean, I'm just honest. I'm just telling them what I see. They don't like it. I get cursed out. I get called names. I've been insulted about everything from my relationship to my appearance to my trying to take money from people. But I think that's the downside of it. But look, I mean, I'll take that in spades if I feel like what I'm doing can reach a lot of people and help a lot of people, because at the end of the day, that's why I gravitated towards this area of law to begin with. And now the best way I can help the most people is to try to give them advice as to, how to move forward with their life, how to have their best marriage, how to get through the process quickest and easiest, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. And you're a New Yorker. You can handle it. You can handle all the criticism.
Yeah, right. Listen, if you're going to, you know from being in this thing, once you put yourself out there, you have to have thick skin, because not everybody's going to like what you have to say. But I think if you're authentic and you're honest with people, I think minimally they need to at least respect that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, some of the videos, a number of them have gone viral. A couple of the other ones are great. Is your husband a man-child? Snoring is causing relationship issues. Dad bods are out. So yeah, definitely some good ones to check out. And Dennis has some great ones. Dennis Vetrano Jr., thank you so much for spending some time with us. I really appreciate it. And check out his channels. They're pretty much everywhere. Great advice for people who are going through a divorce or who will never go through a divorce, either or. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks so much for having me on.